Welcome to Reaching Abundance. I'm Virginia Elder, your host. This is the podcast where you get weekly cliff notes on developing mental fortitude and podcast marketing strategies from top business owners. Ready to level up your show? Start by booking a call with me using the link in the episode description. Let's get into the episode. Welcome to the fifth and final episode in this mini-series. Today's topic is crucial for anyone using podcasting as a tool to grow their business: measuring ROI, return on investment, of your podcast. Now, when we think of podcast ROI, the first thing that comes to mind is probably the most obvious: listeners becoming paying clients. Revenue, cash, money in your pocket. It's the dream scenario. Someone tunes into your show, loves what they hear, and decides to buy your services. We can all evaluate revenue from direct sales with just a couple of clicks. But I'm going to challenge you to broaden your view of ROI in this episode, because your podcast creates more in ROI than just direct sales. Go beyond the obvious with me. There are 8 non-traditional ways your podcast can deliver value, and I'll show you how you can actually measure that value for each one of these in dollars and cents. The 8 non-traditional ways you can measure return on investment from your podcast are brand authority, client engagement, content repurposing value, networking opportunities, team morale and recruitment, lead nurturing, brand affinity, and market research. First on the list is brand authority. Brand authority is the level of trust, credibility, and influence your brand has within its industry or market. It represents how well a brand is recognized as a leader and the expert in its field based on factors like expertise, reliability, and the quality of its products or services. A brand with strong authority is often the go-to source for information, recommendations, or solutions within its niche. Building brand authority involves constantly delivering valuable content, engaging with your audience, and demonstrating your knowledge and expertise, which is exactly what you do when you host a podcast and show up in your ideal listener's feed each week. Over time, this authority leads to increased customer loyalty, more referrals, and often a higher willingness among customers to choose your brand over competitors. To measure your podcast's ROI in the brand authority category, you might track mentions of your brand or your name in industry conversations, online forums, or social media. It's really easy to create a Google alert to help you with this. So anytime your name, your company name, your expertise, or whatever you set an alert for are mentioned on the web, you find out immediately. Hosting a podcast can significantly boost your perceived authority and expertise, which can lead to speaking opportunities, media features, or collaborations. To put some measurable metrics to ROI pertaining to brand authority, track the following: how often you're mentioned in industry publications during a given period, how many backlinks your website has from affiliates, partners, interviewees, or clients, how many invitations you've received to speak at events, and how many requests you've received to guest on other podcasts. If you haven't yet, find out what these numbers are for your business right now. Without a starting point, it's kind of hard to measure growth. You could easily assign a dollar value to each of these. For example, How much would you have to pay an SEO company to boost your web rankings using backlinks? 5K? 10K? The SEO guy I want to work with is 5K per month. So if your podcast earned you 5 new backlinks this year, that's an easy 5 to 10K in return on investment right there. Or think about a different example. Maybe you get invited to speak at a conference or an industry event, and being on stage in front of 500 people results in 200 new email subscribers, 10 referrals, and 15 opportunities for coaching or direct client services. That's all money. Some of those email subscribers will convert into clients down the road. Not all referrals work out, so maybe 7 out of those turn into clients. And then plus, you've got 15 people that signed up for your services. At first, you might think, well, being on stage did that for me. But you've got to rewind even further. How did you even get invited to speak in the first place? Yep. The podcast elevated your brand authority, taking you down this trail of opportunity, and now you're seeing ROI. So, as you'll see with all 8 of these non-traditional ROI categories, it's not always immediately obvious that the podcast is the source, but if you dig in, you'll see that it all stems from having a podcast in the first place. The second way you can have non-traditional return on investment from your podcast is through client engagement. Client engagement refers to the level of interaction, involvement, and emotional connection a client has with your brand, products, or services. It reflects how actively clients participate in and value their relationship with your business, which can be seen through regular communication, repeat purchases, and overall satisfaction. High client engagement typically leads to stronger loyalty, better retention rates, and more referrals because engaged clients are more likely to continue using your services and recommend you to others. Engaged clients are also more responsive to new offers, feedback requests, and initiatives, making them valuable for long-term business growth. If you notice, for example, that clients stick around longer than they used to, refer more of their friends your way, or are more apt to provide reviews for your services now that you host your own show, this is podcast ROI. You'll only notice better client retention, however, if you knew how long your average client stays with you in the first place. So, starting metrics are important. If your typical client does business with you for 6 months, and then within a year of launching your podcast, your client's average engagement is now 9 months, that's a big improvement. Of course, you could quantify the dollar value each client pays monthly and figure out what those additional 3 months really mean for your business. The other client engagement piece that's super easy to measure is a Net Promoter Score, or NPS. You've probably seen those pop-ups where you're asked how likely you are to recommend your product or service to others on a scale of 1 to 10. With this simple question and scaled answer, you can measure customer loyalty, satisfaction, and enthusiasm. If you've had one of these surveys pre-podcast, because of course you need a starting metric to know if you've improved, and your scores now that you're a host are better, that's ROI from your podcast. Some of my clients podcast because of this category specifically, because they've figured out that listeners aren't finding them and converting because of the podcast, but that they are tuning into the podcast as a due diligence measure. So these potential clients are already aware of what an agreement looks like, the pricing. They're pretty much ready to make a deal, but they're just checking in on who this person is, what they sound like, what their personality is like. via the podcast just as a final checkbox before they sign on the dotted line. It's a credibility measure at that point, which is awesome. Now, let's dive into content repurposing value, one of the most underrated ways to measure podcast ROI. Simply put, content repurposing is taking the material from your podcast episodes and transforming it into different formats like blog posts, social media updates, email newsletters, videos, reels for social media. There are so many opportunities here for repurposing. This extends the reach of a single podcast episode, and it multiplies its impact across multiple platforms without requiring you to write content or script it or record it or draft it from scratch each time. The beauty of this strategy is that it maximizes the value of your original content. And when we talk about ROI, it's important to realize just how much cost savings are involved here. Instead of paying for a writer, a social media manager, or a content creator to develop new material for each platform, you can extract multiple pieces of content from one podcast episode. That's where the measurable value comes in. Let's take a look at how to assign a dollar to this. Say you've got a 30-minute podcast episode, and from that episode, you pull key points and you turn that into 5 social media posts, 2 blog articles, and 1 email newsletter. If you were to hire a good freelance writer to create 2 blog articles from scratch, you're probably going to spend about $500. For those 5 social media posts, that's probably another $250. And the email newsletter, that's another $100 easy. Now, instead of shelling out $850 for that content to be created individually, you've already produced the core material in your podcast episode. You can repurpose that content for free or for the cost of your AI platform that you choose, saving almost all $850. Or you can have my team create and post the repurposed content for you, saving about $400. Either route you choose, that's ROI of at least $400 per episode. Let's go bigger. Imagine you repurpose content from your podcast over the course of a month. You release 4 episodes because you're doing a weekly show, and each one gives you enough material for 8 social media posts, 4 blog articles, and a weekly newsletter. If the cost to create that content separately would normally be about $2,000 a month, and you're able to have someone from either my team or yours do it for us based on the original podcast content, again, we can save you about half of that dollar value. We repurpose it directly from your podcast using your brand voice and style, creating about $1,000 worth of value, and that's just for 1 month, added back into your marketing efforts, all from content you've already created. That's the power of content repurposing value. By reusing your podcast material, you're not just saving time, you're actually generating measurable savings. And over time, those savings add up, contributing to your overall podcast return on investment in a way that often gets overlooked. So, if you're thinking about how to get the most from your podcast, remember that every episode is much more than just audio or video in the one time that you record it. It's a gold mine of content waiting to be repurposed across every marketing channel you've got, not just for this month, but reusable next quarter, in 6 months, and next year. The 4th way you might see non-traditional ROI from hosting your own podcast is in networking opportunities. In this context, networking opportunities refers to any connections, referrals, partnerships, or relationships because of your podcast. Whether it's guest appearances, collaborations, or simply getting your name in front of the right people, podcasting opens doors you didn't even know existed. When you host a podcast, you're not just speaking to your audience. You're also engaging with other professionals and leaders in your industry. These interactions can lead to new business partnerships, collaborations, or even high-value referrals that you wouldn't have encountered otherwise. And when we're talking about ROI, these relationships can translate directly into revenue. Ready for some examples? Imagine you invite a well-known expert in your field as a guest on your podcast. The conversation goes well, and after the episode airs, they introduce you to a key industry player who then becomes a strategic partner for your business. This partnership leads to a joint venture that brings in 20 grand in new business over the next year. That 20 grand can be directly tied back to the connection made through your podcast. A clear ROI from networking. How about a different scenario? After featuring a guest who's an industry leader, they recommend your services to a colleague who's looking for exactly what you offer. That referral turns into a long-term client, generating 50 grand in revenue over the course of the contract. Without your podcast, that referral might have never happened. The $50,000 in revenue is another tangible return on investment directly resulting from the networking opportunities your podcast created. At first glance, you might think these are pretty obvious examples of podcast ROI. However, most people forget about the podcast's position as the reason these connections were made. It's easy to mark this revenue down as the result of referral traffic or your own networking skills. But when you take the time to actually trace it back and look at the opportunity for networking that the podcast provided, neither of these scenarios would have occurred if it weren't for the podcast. These examples show how podcasting is more than just a content creation tool. It's a networking powerhouse. The relationships you build, the partnerships you form, and the referrals you receive can all contribute significantly to your business's bottom line. And when you assign dollar values to these successful connections, the impact on your overall podcast ROI becomes undeniable. So, as you continue to grow your podcast, keep in mind that each guest, each interview, and each connection you make can lead to networking opportunities with real, tangible financial benefits. Don't underestimate the power of these relationships. They might just be your podcast's next most valuable asset. Next up, and fifth on the list, we have team morale and recruitment. If there's anything more undervalued in business, I'd like to know. Team morale refers to the overall satisfaction, motivation, and enthusiasm of your employees, while recruitment pertains to your ability to attract top talent. What does this have to do with your podcast? Quite a bit, actually. When your podcast highlights your company culture, values, and expertise, it not only resonates with your audience, but also with your team. Employees take pride in being associated with a brand that's seen as a leader in its field. And this can boost morale, this can lead to higher productivity, higher job satisfaction, and lower turnover. On the recruitment side, a well-produced podcast can showcase what makes your company a great place to work and attract skilled professionals who share your values and vision. Imagine your podcast regularly features stories about the people behind the scenes in your business, their roles, challenges, and successes. Your team then feels recognized and valued, which boosts overall morale. As a result, employee turnover decreases by 10% this year. If replacing an employee costs your company about $15,000 in lost productivity, hiring expenses, and training, that reduction in turnover right there saves you $45,000 if you have 3 fewer employees leaving each year. That's $45,000 in savings directly tied to the positive impact your podcast had on team morale. Think about recruitment. Your podcast doubles as a showcase for your company culture, and it catches the attention of a highly skilled candidate who's been passively looking for a new opportunity. This person applies, citing your podcast as a key factor in their decision to reach out. You hire them, and they quickly become a top performer, bringing in $50,000 in additional revenue within their first year. If recruiting this level of talent through traditional methods would have cost you $10,000 in recruitment fees, for example, you've saved that amount and gained a high-impact employee, making the total value to your company $60,000. These examples illustrate how your podcast can be a powerful tool for improving team morale and attracting top talent, both of which have direct financial benefits. A motivated team is more productive and loyal, reducing costly turnover, while a strong employer brand helps you recruit the best people for your business. Most business owners don't plan for team morale and recruitment to be impacted by their podcast, so they aren't even connecting the dots between content created for ideal clients and their employee recruitment and retention situation. However, obviously, from these 2 examples, hosting a podcast can directly contribute to your company's growth and success. Remember, you're not just creating content. It's highly likely that you're shaping the culture of your business and attracting talent that will drive it forward. And that is a return on investment you cannot afford to overlook. Now, let's talk about lead nurturing, another key aspect of podcast ROI that can have a significant impact on your business. In this context, lead nurturing refers to the process of building relationships with potential clients at every stage of the sales funnel with the goal of moving them a little bit closer to making a purchase. Your podcast is a powerful tool for this, offering a consistent way to engage with prospects, provide valuable insights, and subtly guide them toward becoming paying clients. When done right, your podcast episodes address common pain points, answer frequently asked questions, and showcase your expertise, all while keeping your brand top of mind for listeners who are considering doing business with you. And when these listeners convert into leads and eventually clients, the ROI is clear. Let's explore a couple of examples to see how this plays out in real terms. Suppose you create a series of podcast episodes that address specific challenges your ideal clients face. After listening to these episodes, a listener downloads one of your lead magnets, like a free guide or a checklist designed to solve a certain problem. This leads to a consultation booking and eventually, maybe even a year later, a $5,000 contract. If you can trace this conversion back to the podcast episode and lead magnet, you've just added $5,000 in revenue directly attributable to your podcast's role in nurturing that lead. Example 2, imagine you run a podcast that regularly features case studies and success stories from your clients. One of your listeners who's been on the fence about using your services hears an episode that resonates with their situation. They reach out for more information, and after a few weeks of nurturing, they sign on as a client, bringing in $10,000 in revenue over the course of the project. If your podcast was the catalyst for this decision, that $10,000 can be considered a direct return on investment from your lead nurturing efforts through podcasting. These examples highlight how your podcast can be more than just an informative show. It can be a strategic tool for guiding potential clients through the sales funnel. By addressing their needs, showcasing your expertise, and staying engaged, you're effectively nurturing leads and increasing the chances they'll choose your services when they're ready to buy. If a potential client moves up just 1 or 2 steps in your funnel closer to making a purchase, with your podcast reducing the amount of time you have to spend nurturing them, what is that worth to you? If you're typically faced with a 6-month nurture cycle from the time you meet someone until the time they sign an engagement, but your podcast reduces that time frame by 2 or 3 months, there's a dollar figure there. Find it, and you'll find some serious non-traditional ROI for your podcast. All right, number 7 out of 8 ways you can find return on investment from your podcast: brand affinity. Brand affinity is different from brand authority, which was discussed earlier. Don't get them twisted. While brand authority focuses on your brand's credibility and expertise within the industry, brand affinity refers to the emotional connection and loyalty your audience feels toward your brand. It's more than just recognition. It's about creating a deep, lasting relationship with your listeners where they don't just know who you are, but they like and trust you too. This connection can lead to increased customer loyalty, more word of mouth referrals, and a higher lifetime value from your clients. Your podcast is a prime tool for building this kind of affinity. By consistently delivering valuable content that resonates with your audience, you're not only positioning yourself as an authority, but also as a trusted voice in their lives. This emotional connection is hard to quantify, but it has real, measurable impacts on your business's bottom line. Let's quantify your potential ROI from brand affinity with a couple of examples. You run a podcast that your listeners regularly tune into because it aligns with their values and needs. Over time, these listeners become more than just casual followers. They become brand advocates. Because of this strong brand affinity, they're more likely to choose your services over a competitor's. Say you have 5 clients in a year who specifically mention your podcast as a key factor in their decision to work with you, and each of those clients brings in $8,000. That's $40,000 in revenue directly tied to the brand affinity you've created through your podcast. Think about your podcast as a tool for fostering loyalty among your existing customers. Suppose you launch a new product or service and you promote it through your podcast. Because of the strong emotional connection your audience already has with your brand, they're more inclined to try it out. If 50 loyal listeners purchase this new offer, each contributing $500 in revenue, that's an additional $25,000 attributed to the brand affinity cultivated through your podcast. When your audience feels connected to your brand, they're more likely to choose you over competitors, stick with you for the long term, and spread the word to others. Brand affinity might be tough to measure in this way because you don't always know who's mentioning you or why 50 people bought your new offer. This is why it's important to ask potential and existing clients how they found you and if they're listening to your show. Going forward, recognize that every episode is an opportunity to strengthen the bond between you, your brand, and your audience. This connection isn't just about building trust. It's about driving revenue and sustaining growth for your business. Last section. Ready? The eighth and final way you can measure ROI from your podcast is in market research. By engaging with your listeners through feedback, comments, and even the questions they ask, you can gather firsthand information that helps you better understand your audience's needs, preferences, and pain points. Your podcast provides a direct line to your audience, allowing you to test ideas, gauge reactions, and refine your offers based on real-world feedback. This not only helps you stay ahead of industry trends, but it also ensures that what you're offering truly resonates with your target market. And the insights you gain, they can be incredibly valuable, both in terms of refining your approach and making informed decisions. As an example, imagine you discuss a new product idea on your podcast and you ask your listeners for feedback. Based on their responses, you decide to tweak a few things and make a few adjustments to the product before you launch it. Now, product can be a service package or a coaching engagement. It doesn't need to be a physical product. When you make these adjustments based on your listeners' responses, you're avoiding potential pitfalls and ensuring that it meets their needs because they told you what they liked and didn't like. This adjustment leads to a successful launch, bringing in $30,000 in revenue. Without that feedback from the podcast, you might have missed the mark, leading to lower sales or additional costs to correct the product after you already launched it. That $30,000 in revenue can be directly tied to the insights you gained through market research on your podcast. Now, consider another scenario where you use your podcast to explore emerging industry trends by interviewing experts and discussing new developments in the field. This market research helps you identify a growing demand for a particular service that your business can offer. You quickly adapt and you introduce this new service ahead of everyone else, and it generates an additional $20,000 in revenue over the next 6 months. The ability to identify and act on this trend through podcast-driven market research directly contributes to your business's growth. These examples show you how your podcast isn't just a delivery platform. It's a dynamic tool for gathering market intelligence that can guide your business decisions and strategies. The key is you've got to use it that way. By actively listening to your audience and exploring industry trends through your episodes, you'll be better equipped to make informed choices and drive your business forward. As we wrap up today's episode, let's quickly recap the 8 key opportunities for non-traditional ROI, which is return on investment, from hosting a podcast. These are often overlooked yet incredibly valuable ways your podcast can contribute directly to your business's success. And noticing these 8 ways actually challenges you to look beyond direct sales when you're evaluating ROI. Number 1, content repurposing value. Your episodes are not just audio and video. They are a gold mine of content that can be repurposed into blog posts, social media updates, newsletters, and much more. This saves you significant time and money as you're maximizing the value of each piece of content you create instead of creating 8 to 10 different pieces of content from scratch. Number 2, networking opportunities. Your podcast is a powerful networking tool. Whether you're building relationships with guests, forging new partnerships, or receiving valuable referrals, these connections can lead to significant business growth and new revenue streams if you just keep your eyes open for them. Number 3, team morale and recruitment. Featuring the occasional team member, showcasing your company culture on your podcast can all boost employee morale and help attract top talent to come work for you. A motivated team and a strong recruitment pipeline are crucial for long-term success, and your podcast can play a key role in both of those options. Number 4, lead nurturing. Your podcast is an excellent platform to nurture potential clients, and that is the intention of most podcasters, except they tend to forget about the nurturing process. We want listeners to just jump on, listen to a few episodes, and then suddenly convert into a client. But there is this entire nurture process of them entering the funnel, learning to know, like, and trust you over time, and then becoming a paid client. By addressing their pain points and showcasing your expertise on your show, you can guide listeners through this sales funnel a little bit faster and turn them into paying clients, potentially reducing the amount of time that they are on the fence or just considering purchasing from you. You may even reduce the number of comparisons they do with your services versus other providers. Number 5, brand affinity. Having a podcast helps you build a deep emotional connection with your audience. When listeners feel connected to your brand, they're more likely to become loyal customers, refer others to your services, and stick with you for the long haul, no matter what your competitors are doing. Brand authority. By consistently sharing valuable insights and expertise, your podcast establishes your brand as a leader in your industry. Go ahead, look it up. Find out how many other podcasts talk about your exact topic in the way that you want to speak about it in your industry. I bet it's not very many. This credibility not only attracts clients, but it also opens up opportunities for speaking engagements, media features, and other forms of recognition that will do your business well. Number 7, client engagement. Regular podcast episodes keep your audience engaged, offering a consistent way to interact with your brand. This ongoing engagement deepens relationships, builds trust, and ultimately increases client retention and lifetime value. And finally, market research. Your podcast provides a direct line to your audience, offering invaluable insights into their needs, preferences, and emerging trends. This real-time feedback helps you make informed business decisions, stay ahead of the curve, and refine your offers. Before we close, it's crucial to mention that in order to measure ROI in these 8 areas, you need to establish a starting data point. Many business owners don't know how many backlinks they have, how often they're mentioned online, or the level of engagement they're currently receiving from potential or existing clients. Without this baseline data, it's difficult to accurately measure the impact your podcast is having over time. So it'll be so easy for you to say, oh, well, I'm not seeing any ROI from my podcast, so I guess 50 episodes in, this isn't working. Rather than doing that, as I walked through these 8 opportunities for non-traditional ROI, I bet you heard a couple that you could potentially look into. Go back in the episode, make sure you read the show notes, pick out the non-traditional ROI item that you're interested in, or items, of course, and review, okay, how can I measure this? Where am I at now? When will I measure this? Am I going to measure this quarterly or in 6 months or in a year or in 2 years? Knowing that you may not see direct sales as ROI from your podcast for a while, but that these 8 items will very likely show up much faster and very likely within your first year of podcasting, but you'll miss them if you aren't looking for them. So Take the time to assess where you stand now so you can track the growth and success that your podcast will undoubtedly bring. As you continue to build and grow your podcast, remember your podcast's impact goes far beyond just the number of listeners or the number of downloads or even the direct sales you are or aren't experiencing. Each episode is an opportunity to drive non-traditional ROI in these 8 areas and contribute to the overall success and sustainability of your business. Podcasting isn't just about creating content, and it's definitely not just about creating direct sales. It's about creating value across multiple dimensions of your business, and that is the kind of ROI that truly makes a difference.
I'd love to hear which piece of this conversation meant the most to you today. Head to reachingabundance.com/convo. If you're ready to market your business effectively with a podcast, let's talk. Click the book a call link in the description and I'll take it from there. Thanks for listening to Reaching Abundance. I'm Virginia Elder, and I'll be back next week with another insightful episode for you. Follow me on Instagram @podcastabundance to stay connected in the meantime.